Guys, hope you're doing well. If you're anything like me, you've spent a lot of time on social media lately, on Facebook or Instagram or what have you, and I just took some inventory today and I realized that a lot of what I'm taking in is like junk food for my soul. It's not feeding me, it's not healthy for me. There's just a lot on Facebook, for example, that is divisive or super political and dogmatic and just not healthy for me to be focusing on. What I need for me, what would be best for me is to focus my eyes on Jesus, the one that I have hope in. So I hope that we can be called, all of us, to focus on Jesus during this time and not the million different opinions or things that we could be that's trying to draw our eyes, but that we would focus on Jesus. So I want to keep that in mind as we wrap up this series. And the series, by the way, is the Sermon on the Mount. If we were to take a step back, we'd see that Jesus is breaking his sermon up into 3 different sections. He's talking about what the DNA of a Christian is, what the Christian looks like in the world, and he ends with these 3 illustrations of why it's imperative that we follow him. I've said that a few times. I want, though, to go to that ending section, those 3 illustrations that Jesus gives. And I want us to keep in mind that Jesus is basically asking that same thing that I just asked at the start of what are we focusing on? Who are we ultimately following? This is the end of a sermon, and Jesus has said what he wants to say, and he ends by saying, basically through these illustrations, he's asking, are you going to follow me? Are you going to listen to what I just said? It's chapter 7, 13 to 27. He gives these 3 illustrations, the narrow path. He gives an illustration about false teachers, the tree that bears fruit, and then the wise and foolish builders. In verse 14, he says, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. That even though there's a lot of people going and doing this, that does not mean that's best for us. That what's best for us would be to follow Jesus, even if it's harder, even if fewer people are doing it. And the second example has to do with the tree and its fruit, right? That we can tell who people are based on what they actually live out. And he says in verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. It's not the person that says, I'm a Christian, that is in the best place, but the person that's in the best place, the person actually flourishing, is the one that actually is following Jesus, actually seeking out Jesus and what Jesus would have for someone and for those around us. And then he ends with the foolish and wise builders, and I love this one. It's like the most obvious of the 3. And in verse 21, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And then in verse 26, he says, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. I want us to be called, to feel that call, to focus on Jesus over and above everything else we could be focusing on, to follow Jesus over and above everything else we could be following. There are so many distractions right now, so many different things that we could be paying attention to. But let's not forget to pay attention to what God is doing in our own lives, what God is doing in the world, that there is still a hope that is undefeated. The death of death is still happening in Jesus, that we have eternal hope for eternal life in Jesus. That is never going to change. So again, even though there's a lot of things we could be paying attention to, even though there's a lot of things we could be focusing on, we need to focus our eyes on Jesus over and above them all. I hope that this sermon message devotional series has been a blessing to you, and I cannot wait till the next one that we do, and I hope that I see you on Thursday at our Zoom call. That has nutrients for our soul. I'm doing so good and then I mess up. So So I hope that's I would much rather be speaking to people.